Welcome to the TravelPulse podcast. Here's your host, Mark Murphy.
Welcome back to the TravelPulse podcast. Yes, Mark Murphy, I'm back. I had to take last week off. I got to tell you, folks, between breaking my ass a few weeks earlier that I had mentioned on that previous podcast and having to do the follow with the doctors and the nurses and the physical therapy, well, you get my drift. You know what? The week just got away. And I figured, how often do you get to break your ass? And if you break your ass, you know what? You deserve a week off. I mean, don't get me wrong. I actually worked all week. I just didn't do the damn podcast. Now, ironically, I'm coming to you from Wilmington, North Carolina, on the way south to my winter spot, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm going to hit a number of places along the way. So if you are on Instagram or Facebook, you can follow me pretty much via @MurphyTravels. Virtually everywhere. I'm doing a lot of the photos, et cetera, on Instagram, making some comments about some of the places I've been, but definitely enjoying the road trip. My means of transportation is something called a leisure van. Think of it as a very comfy two-person mini RV. It's about 25 feet long. It's made by a Canadian company. And when I was down for the count on chemo and radiation a year plus ago from a throat cancer diagnosis, I had a little time on my hands when I wasn't sleeping or feeling sick. And I said, you know what? I have traveled the world, but I've never seen certain places. For instance, right now, I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. I have never been here. I have never been to Charleston, South Carolina. I've never even been to freaking Hilton Head. Part of it is I don't play golf, although I did go to Myrtle Beach. So, but as a non-golfer, we just were never Hilton Head folks. So we're going to check out some of these spots on the way and hopefully give you a little perspective of them. In the meantime, the world goes on as we saw because today is Wednesday and yesterday was the freaking midterm election. Now, from my perspective, I have never seen so much coverage of politics, generally speaking, let alone a freaking midterm, than I saw, and I'm sure you'll all agree with that. And from the impact of how it affects travel, you know what? It freaking doesn't. I mean, at the end of the day, the travel industry goes on no matter what happens. And we're talking everything from terrorism to, bad policies to tourism taxes to caravans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know what? It just goes on and on and on. And that's the beauty of travel. I mean, massive injection of revenue into the economy, millions and millions of people working in the travel and tourism industry directly and hundreds of millions, in fact, you could literally say it's the largest employer in the world because travel touches so many things. Now, what does that mean? It means like taxi drivers and restaurants. I mean, if you're a restaurant in a local place like Wilmington, guess what? People are coming here to visit and experience it, plus locals. So yes, it is a local hang, but it is also travel and tourism. And when you start extending it out like that, you see the impact. Here's the challenge for the travel industry as a whole, though, when it comes to government. It is so freaking fragmented. And from somebody on the inside, let me tell you, there are a lot of players in this space, and I'm saying a lot of players that really can talk a great game, but they are focused on one thing, their own freaking interests. They're not worried about, the macro stuff. They're focused on making sure that they're getting their piece, and they'll talk a good game and they'll do the political crap. And I say crap, but you can read through that if you've got any intuition whatsoever, and you can see. I'll just give you one example. There's a group in the industry, and that group is involved with, as a nonprofit, train and travel agents. It's called the Travel Institute. I think the Travel Institute's been around since 1964. Now, that organization was on life support a few years ago. It's recovered from life support, got out of the ICU, was in there for years. I mean, we're talking years and years and years. But again, it's a nonprofit. It, it really should have a much higher profile than it does. But unfortunately, as a nonprofit that's manned by a board of people from the industry that really at the end of the day, you know, don't really either want to make the effort or want to make it a household name, meaning if you get certified by this organization as a travel agent, you should have some street cred. And I caught some flack from their president because, oh God, I'm thinking about 6, 7 months ago, whatever the hell it was. I commented on a piece we wrote about them reaching, a milestone number, I think 25,000 graduates. And my comment, a little snarky, shocking, was, well, 25,000, I wish there were like 25,000 consumers that knew what the heck, a CTC was, and that to me is the problem with this industry. There are people that have been on that board coming and going for years. And I'm asking myself, you're on a board, this organization's there. It really should be out there at the forefront. This industry should be putting money behind it. It should be co-opting and trying to get the word out about what it means to be a professional travel agent. But then again, there's some publicly traded companies where if you listen to the earnings calls, the analysts are like, well, how do you cut out the travel agents in that big line item called commissions? Because they're looking at it as a straight up expense as opposed to a way to generate bookings on a pay for performance basis, which is really what a travel agent is. A travel agent is a pay for performance vehicle. I mean, you get a travel agent to go out and tell the customer about your product. They'll go out and do a whole bunch of other stuff. They'll field all the different questions. They will, answer everything they can possibly answer. And there's no guarantee they're going to get the business. And they're talking up brand X the whole time, and then brand X does the earnings call. And guess what happens next? Well, how are you going to cut these guys out? They're really expensive. Well, there was a great statement years ago that someone had mentioned to me. I wish I could remember who it was, but I've stolen it. And he called the idea of cutting travel agents out and quote saving money as a phantom economy, which is so true because guess what? You got to have somebody answering all those questions and you're going to get the same damn result. They're not going to book with you every time. And if they don't, then that's a expense you got to carry. And you may take 10, 15, 20 calls and pay for all that money, for all that overhead, for that call center in Nebraska or wherever the heck it is. Yeah, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. At least with travel agents, you don't pay until you've collected the money, sat on the money, done whatever you've done with the money, traveled the person, and then 30 days later, you actually pay, realistically about 10% to the travel agent. So from that standpoint, it is kind of interesting to see how this industry works. And when I see people writing about what's going to be the impact of the election on the midterms, well, let me tell you, on travel, here's what's going on. Basically, if you are, a nut job when it comes to politics and you exist on both sides. Trust me, you're on both sides. Like, I know people were saying that they're going to stay up and watch everything and they wanted to know like how to prepare for the midterms and, what's happening with the polls. I'm like, man, you're going to wake up the next day and for the most part, you're going to know. And for the most part, some people are going to be happy. Some people are going to be sad. And some people are going to be really sad. Yeah. And some people are going to be really sad on the other side. And some people are going to be angry. And you know what? It really, at the end of the day, doesn't matter because as entrepreneurs, as businesses, we decide what we're going to do. Yeah, government screws us over in a big, big way, in a lot of ways. I mean, trust me, since 2006 or 7, everyone talking trash on Trump, guess what? My business has never been better. Never been better since going back to 2006 or 7. Then we had the crash, and coming out of the crash, there were a whole bunch of things that were done that made it impossible for small business to succeed. It started with everything from Obamacare to Dodd-Frank, you name it. And I won't bore you with all the details because this isn't a financial podcast, but by the skin of our teeth, we survived that period, got back on track a few years later and started building the business again. And it's a minor miracle that we were able to do it because a lot of businesses went out of business. So you know what? Yes, elections do matter, but at the end of the day, you got to look at it with 2020 vision and say, what's it really gonna mean for the travel and tourism industry? So I talked a little bit about fragmentation with regard to, different players sitting on a nonprofit board, and like that business just was a disaster for years. And I'm happy to see it kind of climb out of the abyss. But man, that business should really be put on steroids, the Travel Institute, and it could go significantly higher and be the go-to resource out there for everyone that thinks about, the importance of certification in travel. Because guess what? If the population looks and says, oh, this is important, guess what? Then you're going to get business as a result of it. If you're certified, you're going to be going and taking more courses as a travel agent. You're going to raise your level of professionalism. It's going to raise the professionalism for the entire industry as a whole. And then it becomes a beautiful, circle. It just keeps going and growing and growing. But if nobody really cares, and right now, it's a very limited organization, then you're never going to get the awareness out there. You're never going to get the marketing out there. No one's really going to see the value. And to be frank, I just looked at an MRI study, and, more than double the number of agents out there when they think about training and education and certification. Most travel agents, 2 to 1, think it's more important to get certified on a destination like Jamaica or Mexico than it is to have a certification that nobody in the marketplace understands the value of. And you can talk about CPAs and everything else, but that's just the reality of it. So, my message on this podcast from this point is, let's get politics out of travel. Let's look at opportunities in travel to raise the level of professionalism. Let's understand that when we evaluate things, that there are people in the industry that don't want to see things improve because they see that potentially as a threat to their organization, for instance. And as such, you have stagnation. We can't have that. If you're not moving forward, you're dying. And that's really the case of what I see happening in certain areas of this industry. Now, with that said, there's some unbelievable areas that are just taken off, and whether it's specific categories of travel like river cruising, whether it's just the fact that there's 110 million millennials and 80 million baby boomers, and in both cases they want to travel, you're set to see incredible growth in the travel and tourism industry for decades to come, especially with American travelers. So if you're looking at where the market's going to be hot for, establishing a travel business or growing a travel business, there's no better place than the USA and the US traveler, because they have the money as baby boomers. They have the time because they're retiring in the thousands, literally every day. And most people don't realize, a Barron's article a few years ago looked at disposable income, and they said, disposable income and, what they could just spend on things like travel and tourism. And the baby boomers controlled over half of all of disposable income in the U.S. marketplace today. So again, a great place to target your business if you're looking at that. And if you're a baby boomer listening, because we get a lot of folks out there that just love travel, one of the things you're going to find is that these folks are courting you, but they're also looking at that millennial market. And what I say to the travel marketers is, don't lose sight. Millennials are really important. Obviously, big, huge block, bigger than the baby boomers. But keep in mind, they're forming families. They're in their 30s. They're buying houses. The people that have got the money to blow are the baby boomers, and they are spending it on travel. So don't lose sight of that, because you can basically be super successful the next 20, 25 years if all you did was focus on baby boomers. Now, with that said, we should kind of, turn a little bit and take a look at what's going on in the world of, the typical stuff, the crazy news, who did something stupid this week, what what the opportunities are out there for, bozo of the week on an airline, or, people taking selfies. I think you've heard me talk about this before, but, terrible situation in Yosemite. A couple taking selfies of themselves, fell 800 feet to their freaking death. So my first thing is a PSA. You know what? No picture is worth dying for. So there's no reason to get so close to the edge that you risk slipping and falling. And I think they've attributed now 126 deaths over the last few years to that. But at the same time, how many of you have traveled on a flight and said, it's an overnight flight, I need to get some Z's, and you've taken something like Ambien? Have you done that? Well, if you did, and they tried to wake you up before takeoff, and you didn't come around real fast, they may have called an ambulance to help you get off the plane because they thought maybe you were having a stroke or something. That's exactly what happened. Did you hear about this guy getting kicked off the plane because he took a sleeping pill and they tried to wake him up? This Canadian dude, he was on his way to Cuba from British Columbia, and was with his wife and son, and he had a layover in Toronto. So the doc told him to take a sleeping pill before his connecting flight. He didn't sleep on the overnight flight going the red eye coming from BC over to Toronto. And he basically took it, fell asleep after he sat down, and then the crew came over and tried to wake him up, I guess, because they wanted him awake and alert for takeoff, and it was difficult to awaken him. So they basically said they had to deboard the plane with this guy because of a medical emergency. They called paramedics. They put him in a wheelchair. They moved him off, and unfortunately, it was a freaking sleeping pill, and they ended up not only missing their connection, they incurred extra charges for additional flights. They missed a couple of days of their vacation. So word to the wise, if you're going to have sleeping pills, make sure you take them once the plane is in the air. Make sure your wheels up, as they say. Otherwise, forget it. Now, I'm going to touch a little bit about some of the politics that are taking place with pot tourism. It looks like more and more places are going to be legalizing pot, and I got to tell you, Canada completely legal, the whole country. I don't think the U.S. is far behind, and I think the quote advantage of pot tourism is going to go away as soon as it's totally widespread. We saw the boom in Colorado for tourism. We've seen it in other places. I think once it's so pervasive, it's no longer a competitive thing. It's not that exciting for people. So at the end of the day, you know what? Whether or not they allow pot tourism or don't, when the final votes are tallied, you know what? It's going to be spread everywhere, and therefore it's going to be nowhere, and it's not really going to matter. People are going to go and get their weed and do what they want to do, and God bless them. Have fun. Just stay safe. So let me circle back with what I'm doing and how I'm traveling right now. So RVing. I never really thought I'd be a guy in an RV. I never thought I'd be the guy pulling up to a campground because let's face it, when you've been all over the world, you've stayed in five-star resorts. I've also stayed in the freaking Amazon jungle. So trust me, I've seen all ends of it. And I'm also the same guy that if I'm going to some great place and we're covering it and we're shooting video or whatnot, and it's a five-star resort, great. If I'm traveling with my wife or my wife and my kids and I want to go and experience something amazing, I'm staying in a really nice place. But I'm also the same guy that's going to stay at the Hampton Inn in Seattle that's a little bit out of the main downtown area, but easily gets down to, it's kind of out past the Space Needle, but you get down where like the Westin is. And I love the Westin. It's a great product, but I'm not going to spend $300 a night when I can spend $129 because I'm only going to sleep there 6 hours. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It doesn't make sense. But I never really saw myself as a guy who's going to own an RV and cruise around and stay at campgrounds. But I got to tell you, I'm discovering some of the parks, both state parks, national parks, that are absolutely incredible. And to be frank, you can't even access and really enjoy these places without, either you bring a tent or you have an RV. But RVs, if they're really huge, they're, cumbersome, they're like driving a bus. And that's why we went with more of like a large van, but super, super comfortable and perfect for what we're doing. This, to be frank, is, is what we want to do. A few, probably 2 or 3 months a year, here and there, trips here and there. But, I certainly wouldn't want to live in a van. I certainly wouldn't want to do the van life, hashtag van life. But I got to tell you, one of the things I would suggest you think about is you think about doing a like Go RVing, go to Go RVing, their website, and you can rent an RV or Cruise America, and you should definitely give it a try. I would encourage you to do it. I would encourage you to look out like 6 or 8 months at great travel destinations. For instance, I'm going to stay at a place in South Carolina tonight. Looks phenomenal. Literally backing up on the beach. You park, you sit outside, you got the ocean. It looks phenomenal. And I would book that for like a week. And I would drag a car along with me. And that way, if I want to go into a local town or something or be mobile, I can still do that. But at the same time, I've got sort of my rolling hotel, and it's like a little mini luxury hotel going with me. So I'm not packing and unpacking and all of that, and I'm super comfortable as I'm driving. Hey, I mean, you got your own shower and toilet, for God's sakes, as you drive. It really is great. So if you haven't thought about it, you should definitely check it out. The market for RVs is booming. They've had 5 straight years of massive growth, and I don't see that letting up because of the baby boomers. They are all over this. And what's crazy is a lot of millennials too. They're going out and they're buying Airstream trailers and all sorts of cool stuff. So definitely keep your eye on this market. It's hot and it's a lot of fun. And with regards to the midterms, they're behind us now. Let's see what happens. And if you've been all caught up in I hate Trump or you're an I love Trump, give it a freaking rest. Now you've got a split Congress. Things have to come together or not. People are either going to get their act together or they're not. And there's nothing you or me can do until the next election cycle. So let's see what happens. Let's stop talking politics and keep talking travel because that's what we all love. And then we'll all take it from there. Now, to wrap things up this week, here's one of my thoughts. And, if you want to have an amazing experience, you should look at something where in the spring and the fall on a cruise, you do what's called a crossing. Now, that could be a ship going from the Caribbean through the Panama Canal up the west coast of the U.S. and basically ending up, let's say, in Vancouver because it's going to do summer Alaska cruises. At the same time, it might be a ship going from the Caribbean across the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, or it could just be an off-season transatlantic sailing on Cunard. Now, what you will find is some of these sailings are really long, so you need to set aside some time. Minimum 7 nights, typically. Many at times 10, 12, 14 nights. And they are freaking dirt cheap. I mean, dirt cheap. Like, you can get on a ship that would cost, for that amount of time sailing, 4 or 5 times the cost. And because it's a repositioning cruise, that's what they call it, a repositioning cruise to do the summer, let's say in the Med, that crossing is dirt cheap. And trust me, people who cruise and love to cruise love what's known as sea days, and those folks are the ones lining up and buying those cabins for those sailings because they know just how great that experience is. One thing I've yet to do is a transatlantic crossing, so that is definitely on my bucket list, and I'm going to go and experience that sooner versus later. I don't know with who or when, but it's definitely happening. And the name Cunard, you probably know it. They have been the mainstay of that transatlantic market for decades and decades and decades. So maybe I'll check out Cunard. Maybe I'll do a podcast from a Cunard sailing in the future. But that is something that I would say look into that. You've missed it for the fall for the most part because it's already November. Ships have already made their voyages. But If you can't get away, or you're going to double down on vacations after the holidays and into the spring, look at that sort of late April, early May for those sailings, and you're going to find some great deals. And then do a post stay. So if you're sailing from, let's say, Miami to Barcelona on a repositioning cruise, spend 3 or 4 nights in Barcelona while you're there. You're still beating the crazy tourist crowds. You're going to get a great deal, and you're going to be in an amazing country, an amazing destination, an amazing city at the same time. So some industry thoughts this week, some perspectives on the midterms and travel and tourism, and some interesting headlines. Not so many this week, but at the same time, a little tip at the end to try cruising and look at one of these repositioning cruises for your next vacation. Till next week, or the next time I get around to doing a podcast, I'm Mark Murphy. We'll catch you later.